still love you every day. My simple self's not gone. I still love you every day.
Hello everyone, welcome to the R-B-Sides, a music review channel dedicated to reviewing remixes and remixes. Yes, I'm back. I had a little bit of time off so that I could deal with some of the more pressing issues in my life. Admin, daily structure, artistic pursuit, family. Those are all gone now, vanquished. So it's time to do some music reviews again. And we're getting back into it with an RB remixer retrospective that I've been wanting to do for quite a while now. Thus far, all of the artists we've looked at in this series have been electronic remixers, but in this instance we are looking at a rock band, M83, Pantha Bear, Geologist, Deacon. Together they are Animal Collective, and they have spent the last 2 decades carving out their own particular niche at the edge of alternative indie music. In fact, calling them a rock band might be kinda contentious, because from the twinkly Mercury Rev-esque abrasiveness of their debut to the warmer Grizzly Bear style sheen of their most recent 2 albums, they've covered a heck of a lot of ground over the last 24 years. They've gone from acoustic freak folk experiments to David Lynchian electronica, all within the course of a few albums. Their early industrial noise experiments gave no indication that they would be dropping one of the most critically acclaimed synth pop albums of 2009. And just when that album made it look like they were poised to break into the mainstream, they followed with 2 of the most angular, perplexing and sensory overload inducing albums they've dropped to date. And somewhere in amongst their hectic touring and recording schedule, they also found time to record some remixes, spanning artists from the worlds of folk, techno, neo-soul and traditional African music. So in this video we are going to be looking at the 11 remixes that have been released under the Animal Collective name over the years, and I'll be ranking them in the classic tier list format. As usual, the criteria will be how enjoyable I find the remixes to listen to and how creatively I think they interpret the source material. A quick note on what remixes I'm including here. Basically, I am going with any remix that has the Animal Collective name in the title. Most, if not all, of the remixes under the Animal Collective name seem to have been done by Deacon, usually during stints outside of the band's recording and touring schedule. He did a remix for the Avalanches as well, but as that one doesn't bear the Animal Collective name, then I won't be including it in this list. Similarly, Pantha Bear has done a whole body of remixes outside of the Animal Collective brand, and I won't be covering those here either. Not while I could make a whole nother video just about them. Also, as per usual, we're only going to be looking at officially released remixes on this list, so if you were hoping I was going to do a deep dive into their remix of Bob Dylan's Don't Think Twice It's Alright, then sorry, it's not happening. So yeah, let's go in 2 by 2 into the remix catalogue of Animal Collective, or ANCO as I'll be referring to them in this video, in alphabetical order of artists, starting with...
I want you, I do. I want you, so want you, I want you.
Beat Spacek, I Want You, from his 2015 album Modern Streets. Beat Spacek is the alter ego of alternative soul artist Steve Spacek, whose previous work I have enjoyed. I was a big fan of his 2003 album Vintage High Tech, which he did with his band Spacek. Beat Spacek is a project he did for the Ninja Tune label, who describe it as much a love letter to the future as it is an ode to the past. Blah blah blah, he likes both new and old stuff, we get it. In practice, this basically means that Spacek is applying his silky croon to more upbeat electronic genres. You get bits of electro, techno, drum and bass, UK garage. He generally handles this genre hopping pretty well. His production does seem like he has a vested interest in these genres, rather than the more dilettante stylings you might get from other genre hopping albums you can name. I Want You, however, is not one of the more successful experiments in this realm. There are 3 main elements that make up this track. You've got the stuttering beat, which can't really decide if it's meant to be dancehall, drum and bass or footwork. got this lethargic synth pulse that goes on throughout the entire track, and then you've got Spacek's vocals, which have this distant, haunted quality that reminds me quite a lot of Roger Robinson from King Midas sound.
I lost you. I lost you. I want you. I do. I want you. So open fantasies you.
The problem is that none of these three elements even seem like they're trying to work with each other. The drums are really overactive and just spitting away in the background, whilst over the top you've got this synth that's basically just like elbowing one keyboard chord for the entire song. And then you've got Spacek himself, who just sounds lost in it all, and not in a good way. For what it's worth, I think it might be a mixing issue, because I listened to the version he did for his Boiler Room session, and this live version works significantly better. The drums are now front and centre in this version, and it actually sounds danceable as a result. It's still a little muddled, but at least it seems purposeful, whereas in the album version the vocals and synth are right up front and the beats are just struggling away in the background. From a remixer perspective, it seems like the best thing to do with this one would be to strip it down and rebuild it from the ground up, just to get to the essence of the actual song. Animal Collective, however, have other ideas. Their remix can be found on the Beat Spacek remix EP from 2015, as well as the deluxe version of Modern Streets. And rather than try and untangle the headache-inducing composition of the original, they actually push it into a full-blown migraine. It sounds like they've just slowed the original down to time-stretched proportions, which, at its best, I guess kind of resembles a Suicide-style electro-punk thing, but that's giving this track way too much credit. The kick drum just chugs away, the vocals are just looped over with reverb, they're pitch shifted here and there, I guess to try and make them sound psychedelic. Instead, you just get this disorienting choir that sounds like a loop pedal being abused. The original version seemed like IKEA flat pack furniture, where all the parts came from different products, but somehow managed to put them together into something. This version just sounds like someone kicking said flat pack furniture over and storming off in a huff. Yeah, this is an unfortunate one to start with, because I love Animal Collective and I want to come into these tier lists with a positive outlook like Justin Hawkins, but frankly this remix just sucks. It's unlistenable and it sounds like it was tossed off in a few minutes. I guess at a push, if this was made by a more punky band like The Fall or someone like that, then I'd appreciate it for their insolence, but coming from Animal Collective, this is a very low D tier for me. It's bottom of the D tier. I do not want this. Goldfrapp, Little Bird, from their 2008 album 7th Tree. Goldfrapp were a synth-pop duo comprising of Alison Goldfrapp and Will Gregory. You all know Goldfrapp are. They did that song about public transport. And other stuff, I'm sure. 7th Tree is an album so named because Alison dreamed about a very large tree and apparently was told within the dream that it's the 7th one. The main story with this album, though, is it represented more of a rocky, folky dimension for the duo. Labels that I don't think they were entirely comfortable with. They mentioned in a Pitchfork interview they listened to some Nick Drake in response and decided that actually what they were doing wasn't that folky, which, if you're picking Nick Drake as your benchmark for the genre, pushes a lot of people out of that bracket. Kind of like listening to Led Zeppelin and saying, well, Hootie and the Blowfish wasn't really that rock. Whatever the genre though, Little Bird is a pretty lush track. It's very much got that late 60s psychedelia to it. These backward strings and the humming Rhodes, and some warm warbles that make it very appropriate for bird watching.
The shiny black and screw flew out a sail on, though much to our surprise, he had 2 miles rise.
Alison's vocals have this nice little nursery rhyme phrasing in the verses, and chord change when they go into the chorus is really sumptuous. Her delivery has that great quality of managing to be emotional in how emotionless it is as well, particularly when she sings lines like As the track goes along, it builds and builds. You get drums that come in after 2.5 minutes. You get more and more of the trademark 70s style synth sounds, and there's a big anthemic vocal crescendo at the end. The ending doesn't quite hold the magic of the first 2/3 of it for me. It breaks cover a little too readily, I think, but still a damn good track overall, this one. Animal Collective's take on this track is one of their earliest remixes, and it's actually the first one that I bought as part of this wonderful Caravan Girl picture disc. Gotta say, sound quality wise, this is the first moment in my record buying career when I learnt that picture discs should be seen and not heard. I bought this remix at the time because I was a huge Anko obsessive and I hadn't even heard the original Goldfrapp track. And next to the A-side, Caravan Girl, which is a fairly pedestrian piece of indie rock, I found this remix pretty refreshing in comparison. However, now that I've heard the original version of this song, I actually find the remix somewhat underwhelming. The backbone of this remix is this robotic synth line that sounds like popcorn by Hot Butter, albeit if the popcorn machine had been plugged directly into the sink.
The shiny black is gold, flew in to say hello, though much to her surprise, he had 2 miles for ride.
It pretty starkly and firmly centres around this one element. There's no bass, no percussion, very little flesh on the bones of this one apart from some twinkly synths that I think are from the original and a few backwards effects on the vocals. There's also this prickly, ear-piercing tone that comes over the top of it as well. Which I did quite enjoy when I was younger, but now that I'm a 38-year-old tinnitus-riddled husk, it definitely hits me a bit different these days. The lack of compositional changes mean that the verse and the chorus kind of just bleed into one. Towards the end of the track we have a big finish whereby the popcorn synth gets doubled. And then it just suddenly flames out at the end. Compositionally, this ending reminds me a lot of the outro to Panda Bear's Comfy and Nautica from his Person Pitch album. Doubling of the sample followed by the music concrete noise at the end actually made me think for years that this remix was by Panda Bear rather than Deacon. So yeah, this one just seems like a sketch of an idea really. It feels a lot less formed and a lot more bite-sized than the original. For what it's worth, that popcorn synth is kind of fun, and I have used this track as a DJ tool in the past and I would do so again. As a standalone listen though, this feels too minimalist. It feels unfinished and desperately like it needs some extra elements to beef it up. So I would put this one in the C tier. C for Caravan. Decadence by Heavenstamp. This is a Japanese rock band comprising of core members Sally Cinnamon and Tomoya S. They mentioned in interviews that they're inspired by UK rock quite a bit, like My Bloody Valentine and Radiohead, and they've done a fair bit of work with Block Party's guitarist Russell Lissack. Decadence is from their self-titled debut album, and you can definitely hear the UK influence in it. The guitar that underpins the track has a bit of the old second-hand gang dance that you hear in noughties UK indie bands like Franz Ferdinand and the Ting Tings. And the chord progression on the choruses has very much got that 90s Radiohead feel to it. Cinnamon's got a great set of pipes on her. The vocals on this track are really powerful. There's a few little nice production touches, like the speaker alternation on the driving guitars towards the end. All these little chords at the end of the choruses that make it sound a little bit like There She Goes by the La's. Yeah, this track's pretty fun. It's not really pushing any boundaries as far as I can hear, but the energy's great, and I prefer the vocals on this than the interminable parade of hipster lads who used to do this kind of music in the UK. Anko's remix came out on the Decadence EP in 2012, and of all their remixes, I'd say this is the one that makes the biggest departure from the original, to the point where it seems flat out disinterested in anything that happened in it. In its place, you get this echoey guitar loop that sounds like someone sticking a drill into your eardrum. Over the top of these, Cinnamon's vocals have been pitch shifted into Smash Alien territory. This, along with the vocals of the rest of the track, do make me heavily question if this is even the original vocal take or even the original lyrics. This remix has so little in common with the original, I had to look around a fair bit just to check this was definitely the thing. In fact, I was actively hoping that there was a better Animal Collective remix out there I could listen to, and was quite disappointed when I found Heavenstamp tweeting that this was actually the correct one. The guitar noise is so irritating, and it just gets faster. You get these drum fills over it and this strange vocal throb that pulses up and down. The sense I get from this remix is that Anko were like, well, Heavenstamp are Japanese, so why don't we keep that theme going? And that's why they just banged out this freeform noise composition that sounds like a halfway point between the Boredoms and Merzbow. What with this and the Spacek remix, it might sound like I don't like Animal Collective's noisier stuff, and that couldn't be further from the truth. My overall favourite Anko album is Arc, formerly known as Here Comes the Indian. My favourite track from Strawberry Jam is Cuckoo Cuckoo. And you know that untitled track on Spirit They've Gone that sounds like a music box fighting with a circular saw? Genuinely big fan of that one as well. But those tracks all had this juxtaposition of beauty and dissonance, and this remix just doesn't have any of the beauty to offset it. It's just this workmanlike wall of noise that sounds like it could have been generated by any number of experimental artists. One thing I do like about this remix though is you will find an absolute ton of videos for it on YouTube. And there's a reason for that, which is that Heavenstamp actually ran a competition for people to create a music video for the Anko remix. And it is genuinely quite fun to see how all these different video artists interpreted Anko's rework here, although after a while I did have to mute the videos to be able to enjoy them. No matter the visuals though, the actual remix itself is something of a chore to listen to, so this one also unfortunately goes in the D tier, although I'm going to put it above Spacek because at least this remix has a structure and a trajectory across its time span, which the Spacek one doesn't. Yeah, it feels more like a hell stamp, this one. It's not for me. M83 Go from their 2016 album Junk. M83 are a French synth rock band helmed by Anthony Gonzalez. I think they're probably most well known for Midnight City, which has soundtracked everything from Made in Chelsea to the Musical Comedy Awards, and many other things in between. I've listened to a fair amount of M83 in my time, but I kinda gave junk a wide berth at the time due to the somewhat tacky cover depicting a couple of McDonald's-style pom-poms. This symbolism was all part of the vibe that Gonzalez was going for, as he mentions that he was inspired by 70s and 80s TV shows like Punky Brewster and Who's the Boss, and wanted to bring back some of the passion from the theme tunes of those shows.
So take a chance and face the wind. An open road and a road that's hit.
Too many cooks, too many cooks. So yeah, the object is to cram some of that theme tune cheese into M83's compositions, and from the few tracks I've listened to, it works up to a point. Maybe a little too close to the real thing at certain points, but Go is a track that I did particularly enjoy, and it's guest vocalist Mylan who brings the anthemic quality to this track. It starts off with the expected 80s soul and adult contemporary vibes to it. The verses are a little hushed with a sprinkling of the Falco stuttering in them.
Meet me at the station, station. Can't get you used to patience, patience.
You then get this wonderfully telegraphing pre-chorus with Mylan counting down.
8, 7, 6, 5.
Love the chorus on this, sounds chirpy and fulsome, and the layering of the instrumentation is wonderful. Loads of lovely details in this. I like the synth bass that comes in at the chorus. You can also see that Gonzalez very much recognised the sax solo in Midnight City as being an MVP, as he repeats the trick on this one with a guitar solo, courtesy of an uncredited appearance from legendary 80s axeman Steve Vai. Which does bring the cheese levels of this track up to a slightly artery clogging level, but it's from an album with fast food characters on the cover, so I don't really think I can complain. Anko's remix appears on the single release of Go, which was the third single to be released from Junk, reining in the excess for more of a slow dub techno beat that's got more than a little basic channel about it. And there's these synth chords on the beat that have this sharpness that almost gives it a bit of a reggae feel.
Can't get you used to patience, patience. Which time this time could just be a beach.
This is a mode that Animal Collective have been in a few times before. You hear a fair amount of it on Panda Bear's solo album, Tomboy. But here it gives a really nice counterpoint to the excess of the original version, whilst keeping a lot of the qualities of the original, like the atmosphere and the vocals. I don't know how deliberate it is, but there's this really nice bit in the pre-chorus where the meandering chords seem to almost sound like they're lost.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Like they're not sure when the chorus is coming, even though Mylan is counting down in the background. Less enjoyable to me is what Deakin does with the track after the second chorus. He starts bringing the melodic and vocal elements in and out of the track dub style. Initially this seems like it's building up tension to a big release at the end of the track, but once we get to the 4-minute mark we kind of realise that actually that's just it for the rest of the track. It ends up being kind of irritating, like a kid messing around with the mute button on a remote control, and continued to do it long after the humorous side of it dried up for good. So yeah, it runs out of ideas a little bit towards the end, but up until that point though, this is a really lush, soulful, minimal techno reworking that very much plays to the original track's strengths, and yeah, I like this one. I'm putting this in the B tier, I would say. Somewhere in the middle, I think this will end up. Pantha Du Prince, the minimal techno project from Hendrik Weber. Pantha has had 2 Animal Collective remixes over the course of his career, and due to alphabetical order we're going to be starting with the most recent one of those, which is the 2023 track Liquid Lights. The original is from Garden Gaia, which is an album about planet Earth. Not necessarily one designed to make any huge ecological points as far as I can tell, and in an interview Weber did say that it's as much a city album as it is a rural one. Like much of Pantha's catalogue, Liquid Lights is a house track that is compositionally minimal but emotionally maximal. Has this pretty trim clipped beat throughout, and it mainly revolves around this twinkle twinkle lullaby synth line over the top. Reminds me a little bit of music from James Holden's Border Community label, although the chords that start gradually swelling over it have more than a little bit of Pachelbel's canon to it for me. It basically plays around with these sort of elements for the entire track. You know, it has the occasional bass dip here, the warm bass pads there. Melodically, chord-wise, it's a little saccharine for my liking. Sort of this sickly sweet mixture of joyful and mournful, like an ice cream van that's been sent by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Deacon's remix comes from the 2023 remix collection of Garden Gaia, and it's the first of a few remixes in this list that bring in a specific recurring trick of theirs. One of Animal Collective's biggest selling points throughout their entire career has been their vocal style, gorgeously reverberated and harmonised in a way that has warranted numerous Beach Boys comparisons over the years. And so with this Pantha Du Prince remix, Deacon has not passed up the opportunity to play to the band's strengths.
Try to feel inside the teachings of all that I say.
Yep, you guessed it.
They brought in their own
Lyrics.
to the party.
We're going to be using this button quite a bit in this review. Spoiler alert, I'm not actually going to. You don't need to see that animation 5 times. Don't even need to see it once, if I'm honest. The lyrics for this track are not available online, and I'm not great at picking this sort of thing out, but as far as I can tell, the lyrics are wistful. And this works superbly well for the backing track that Deacon has created here. It's underpinned by this half-beat stomp that gives it even more of a reggae feel than the M83 remix.
The moment I go without my guide, I feel like a stray.
Over this you've got these beautiful synth strings throughout. Reminds me a little bit of Boku Fish era underworld, such as Jumbo or something like a Mama. But yeah, it's a really cozy, warm sunset track, this one, and it definitely sounds and feels more developed and confident than earlier Anko remixes. So yeah, I would say strong A tier for this remix. It's a little bit of a slow burner. It took me a while to really attune to this one, but really enjoying this one now. Doesn't quite have the spark to take it into S tier for me, but I highly recommend this remix nonetheless. Prior to Liquid Lights, Animal Collective also remixed Pantha Du Prince's 2011 track Welt am Draht. The original is from the album Black Noise, an album which was inspired by the concept of silence. I mean, you can break out your John Cage jokes as much as you like, but actually, listening to the original here, I can kind of hear where he's coming from. Once again, we're in minimal house territory for the beat here. The track itself opens with some electro harp noises and a choral float. And about a minute and a quarter in, we get to the main loop refrain that anchors this track. sounds like a thumb piano sample that's been heavily treated, and over the course of the track you'll find it gets buried over and over again by these big fogs of synth that just engulf every other melodic element. A little bit too much after a while, as it does reach the point where it feels like the focal point of the track gets somewhat obscured. It's pretty and calming and it has its moments, but of the two tracks here I feel like Liquid Lights makes for a more focused and presentable original. Black Noise already has an Anko connection to it, as Panda Bear actually adds his vocals to one of the album's original tracks, Stick to My Side. I think Weber realised he couldn't pass up the chance to get more of Anko involved though, and that's why we have this remix as part of the 11 versions of Black Noise album. This remix eases into life very similarly to the original one, with the harp and the choral stuff kind of building up, albeit with slightly different effects. They're a little more sharp, a little more Animal Collective. Get some clattering chimes to form the rhythm, and then eventually the percussion comes in. It's this big stomp, but the pattern is somewhat sparse, so it has this gliding quality to it. It also largely focuses on the thumb piano sample from the original, and it is all the better for it. I think it's the strongest part of the original track. Deacon's vocals come in and they sound a little like they were recorded in a monastery. Fortunately, they are mostly garbled and plastered in reverb, so I feel less bad about not being able to isolate what they're singing about. But the vocals layer up really nicely on this, it's beautiful stuff. The remix mainly stays at this level for the rest of the track, apart from the coda where it basically changes tempo to this time-stretched version of the beat. Which, as outros go, is fine, but I kinda wanted something a little more conclusive, I guess. Nonetheless, this is another pretty strong remix, this one. I kind of wish they hadn't come in quite so heavy on the kick drums. It would have been nicer if they'd built up to how weighty they were. And as I say, the outro doesn't really feel like a slam dunk to me, but it's also an A tier one. I'd say it's lower than the Liquid Lights remix, but solid A tier for sure.
Visible horizon.
Love Like a Sunset by Phoenix from their 2009 album Wolfgang Phoenix. An album that is widely considered to be their breakout moment into the mainstream. Certainly enough that they got to perform their opening track Listomania from this album at the Paris Olympics just gone. In one of their documentary videos, Phoenix mentioned that this two-part track, Love Like a Sunset, was designed to be the centerpiece of Wolfgang Amadeus Phoenix, and the first part is entirely instrumental. It begins with this twinkling percussion. It subtly builds as the track goes along. These big swelling cinematic synth chords just gradually rise and rise until just after the 3-minute mark, when everything briefly drops out. You then get this frazzled guitar swell that sounds like a plane's taking off. And some beep boop synths over the top that sound like someone's kid is playing with the aeroplane's console. steady house tempo drum then comes in and these gentle guitar drones start soaring over. The riff just gets fuller and fuller with these drum fill-ins. There's a sudden flourish and the key gradually deteriorates in order to make way for part 2. This second part mainly sounds like a pitched down version of the intro to part 1, but it's an actual song at this point, with Thomas Mars singing about love as if it's a fleeting moment of landscape.
Visible horizon, right where it starts and
I think this is a really effective 2-part suite. The first part feels like being in an aeroplane, and then the second part is more like free fall. This Anko remix of the track is the first one that I believe is explicitly credited to Deakin under the mantle of Deakin's Jam. It appears on the B-side of their single 1901, and it also features on the remix version of Wolfgang Amadeus Phoenix. It starts off a little inauspiciously with this beat that sounds very much like a Casio metronome of some sort. It just click-clacks away in this rather ham-fisted manner, and this little 3-note bird whistle over the top doesn't help much. Once the drones and the vocals start coming in, however, this remix starts to transform quite considerably. And ultimately you get this wonderful swelling shoegaze feel to it, just being engulfed in these gorgeous clouds of sound. Deakin then adds his vocals in around about the halfway mark, and they blend in phenomenally well with Thomas Mars. That said, there is one thing that stops this from being an S-tier remix for me, and it's this little bit that happens at the end. Wait, no, what? Wait, where are you going? I'm not finished. Come back. I was enjoying that. I don't mind fade-outs in songs if they've clearly run their course, but Deakin barely gives you a moment to take in the summit of the song before he's like, right everyone, time to climb back down. The coach is waiting. In most cases though, I'd much rather the artist just attempted to end the song, even if it's kind of abrupt. Hell, they could have put the ending to the Goldfrapp remix on this one and it still would have been preferable to that fade out. This song just doesn't feel like it's meant to be a tight 4-minute radio song. It feels like Deakin should be writing out the coda to this track for at least another minute, maybe 2. And it's a shame because honestly, with a couple more minutes of this, I think this easily would have gone into the S tier. But as it stands, this one is an A tier remix for me. I think I would put this just above the Pantha Du Prince one here. Mirando by Ratatat from their 2008 album LP3. They are an electronic rock band from Brooklyn comprising of Mike Stroud and Evan Mast, and when asked to describe their sound in 5 words, they called it the exact opposite of jazz. I had both this album and their second album, Classics, on vinyl, and I definitely prefer LP3. It was their first album that they recorded in an actual proper studio, and the studio itself had lots of new instruments which they decided to use in the composition. Mirando starts off with this clattering steam pump percussion, and it then morphs into a bleepy dancehall beat with a chunky snare sound. They use the percussive sample as a little bridge in between sections, and with each new part of the track they introduce new melodic ideas into the mix. About halfway through you get these melancholic mellotron flutes that come in as well. And it ends on this lovely violin loop at the end, which is a gorgeous send-off. You'll notice the one element I haven't mentioned so far is the guitar, which has always been the element of Ratatat's sound I have a bit of a complicated relationship with. I've seen at least one publication compare it to Brian May, and it does have that similar stadium anthemic quality to it, which I'm not hugely keen on. It also reminds me of some of the guitar solos on Daft Punk's Discovery, which genuinely made me think that Ratatat were French for the longest time rather than American. Still, the guitar is used pretty effectively here, it's not too overwhelming, and there's so many other elements that have gone into this track. It's a very busy yet tight instrumental, and there's loads of ideas in it that all work together really well. Mirando is actually the first remix that Anko were commissioned to do. It's also the longest Animal Collective remix at just under 10 minutes in length, and as such it ends up being kind of split into 3 parts. Like many of their remixes, it starts beatless with this lightning storm crackling away in the undercurrent. Eventually the dancehall beat from the original kicks in, but it just has the mournful flute loop over the top. It feels sparser and a lot more hopeless than the original. The breakdowns are also not as active as the ones in the original. They're these short 1.5 bar breakdowns that makes it sound like the beat's having a narcolepsy. And then it leads into the second part of the track, which is this monotonous dubbed out groove with a minimal techno feel. It's pretty repetitive to the point where it does sound a bit like an inkjet printer going ham after a while. Although if you listen carefully, this subtle bleepy melody comes in over the top of it, and for me it's one of the strongest parts of the remix. Eventually the bleepy melody subsides and it's replaced with this angelic choir that floats across the beat with no real care for its structure. Not really matched up with the meter, and it does kind of feel like it's playing against the track rather than with it, but it does sort of work with the chaos nonetheless. And eventually all of the rhythmic elements fade out one by one and we are left with the choir. As far as first attempts at a remix go, this is a pretty interesting one. It almost feels improvised in the way that it's been put together, and as such the various ideas on display don't really cross-pollinate that much. It feels pretty freeform and meandering compared to the tightly oiled machine of the original. At the same time though, the length of the remix does allow you to get lost in some of the grooves and ambience in the way that many of Anko's shorter remixes just don't. And the last 2/3 of this track have some lovely moments to get lost in. So yeah, good remix this one. Pretty muddled overall, but with some genuinely enjoyable ideas throughout. So I think I'm going to put this in the B tier, just below M83. Tinariwen, Tamiyaut from their 2012 album Tassili. Tinariwen are a desert blues band from Mali who have been active since 1979. Their sound matches up traditional Tuareg and African music styles with a more western flavoured form of rock. And like Heavenstamp, this has resulted in some international collaborations and plaudits. This album, Tassili, won a Grammy for Best Global Music Album in 2012. They've been on stage with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. They've been interviewed by Stephen Colbert.
Is there a big music scene in the desert of Mali?
A couple of the tracks on this album feature guest performances from Kip and Tunde from the band TV on the Radio. The album gets its title from the Tassili Naja National Park in the Sahara Desert where they recorded it, and the idea behind the album was to focus mainly on live, band-centric, song-oriented music with as few overdubs as possible. And Tamiyaut definitely lives up to this ideal by being a particularly stark piece of folk. Acoustically, it's as dry as the desert it was recorded in, with this fairly monotonous guitar pluck forming the through line of the song whilst other notes wander around it. I quite like the obtuse timing of the plucks, and the hushed vocals are really nice as well. They've got this very lived-in quality to it. It feels like a song where the lyrics are the centre point given the lack of musical garnish, but didn't really get much of a sense of what this song's about from the English translation other than he wants to sacrifice a goat on a mountain. Not just any goat though, a young beautiful one. The Animal Collective remix appears on the Tinariwen Remixed EP from 2012, and Jesus Christ, this was a pain to track down. Pretty much all streaming services seem to have this EP blocked in a number of territories, including the UK, so finding a download version of this to review was an absolute nightmare. In the end, my housemate managed to source a copy of it from somewhere or other, so shout out to him. Deacon doesn't really do anything too grand on this one. He kind of just touches it up a little bit. He gives the pulse a little bit more of an echoing stutter, and he takes the track in a more psychedelic direction with the use of guitar feedback and reverb over the vocals. Kind of changes the scene from a flat radial plain to a more mountainous section of desert where there's echoing and winds. And it says something about how much this remix washed over me on the first few listens that I somehow missed that Deacon added a couple of his own verses in the second half of the track. Does make an effort to blend them, mind, by sticking to the original vocal melody and adding some reverb to make it sound like the voice of the windswept plains. It adds a nice bit of detail to the scene, but of all the Deacon vocal cameos in these remixes, this one for me is the least impactful. The other ones all make me go wow at how they transform the source material, whereas this one makes me go, oh, okay, that's there. If you're looking for something to tide you over while you're waiting for the Sung Tongs live album to come out in a couple of months' time, then this wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if you can find it fairly easily. It's not mind-blowing, so it's not a remix that I would really go out of your way to try and find unless you're a die-hard Anko completist, but I think Deacon hits just the right level of input on this remix. It's a nice little bunch of touches that just give it a fresh air of life, and I'll put this one in the B tier as well. I think I'll put this one under Mirando. Zero by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs from their third album, It's Blitz. The story behind this album is almost the exact opposite to the Goldfrapp one, in that they went from that gritty, energetic indie punk sound of their first two albums to more or less making a synth pop album. Apparently this came about purely because Nick Zinner brought an ARP synthesizer to the studios just as something to use for downtime entertainment, and it ended up becoming the focal point of a fair amount of their composition. Although Karen O also confirmed in an interview that they had been looking to make a dance song that they really loved for ages and just hadn't been able to do it up until this album. I think Heads Will Roll ended up being more of the standout single from this album, but Zero is a pretty decent track as well. Again, it's one of those tracks that just builds nicely in layers. You've got that Marauder-esque synth line at the beginning and a 2-kick drum machine.
Find me.
Each element from the synths and the drums just gets fuller and fuller over the course of the first few verses and choruses. As per, it's Karen O's vocals that hold this one together, going from the low-key vocal fry to borderline squeals. And it culminates in this big synth riff that's like a Gary Newman rendition of Material Girl. The track does get a little mechanical after the 3-minute mark, as it does feel like it's exhausted all of its tricks by that point. So it does end up being a rare example of a pop song that I actually think would have benefited from being composed in the TikTok age. But otherwise, solid piece of electro rock, this one. There's a lot going for this. Zero was the first single to be released from the album, and it includes the Anko remix. My recollection of when it was released was that people hated this remix. I swear I saw those vibes around, and yeah, all I've been able to find on the internet is a slightly scathing Pitchfork review, which is quite a jarring shift when you consider that their previous news coverage described the phrase Animal Collective Remix Yeah Yeah Yeahs as a dream headline. Certainly the most unique sounding of all the Anko remixes. It starts with this boom boom tish drum, gives it this sparse industrial feel. It has this really nice build up at the beginning with this light whooshing, some echoing mouth pops and a vocal loop. Then we get some burbling synths and the vocals come in.
Shake it like a ladder to the sun. Makes me feel like a madman on the run.
Honestly, so far I quite like this remix. I think Karen O's vocals do fit in quite nicely in this industrial dub spaciousness they've created. Admittedly, I do find some of the pitch shifting effects they've applied to her vocals a little on the nose and unnecessary.
Get your leather.
You've also got these aggressive synths that come in that sound like a haunted slot machine. But overall, all these elements are fine, it's just that they don't really do anything with them. We don't even get any chorus in this remix, it's just a few loops of the verse and then the track just kind of finishes. And it's frustrating on this one because it feels like there's so much more that they could have developed with this, but it just ends up being very fleeting and empty as a result. It does really seem that Anko struggle with remix length in a lot of these instances, and for me this is one of the bigger casualties of that problem. Much like the Goldfrapp remix, this has cool elements but just feels unfinished, and therefore, just like Goldfrapp, putting this one in the C tier, although a little above Goldfrapp, as for me it's got a few more elements of interest going on there.
There's no goodbye. There's no goodbye. There's no goodbye.
And finally, Yoko Ono, Plastic Ono Band. There's no goodbye between us. From Take Me to the Land of Hell, her 15th solo album in 2013. Yoko Ono is there's some big thing that Yoko Ono's known for. can't really remember what it is. But it doesn't matter because she's got at least 3 remix albums to her name, so we'll get to it someday, don't you worry. I don't know her music that well at this point, but what little of it I have heard to date, it does tend to grapple with the big questions. There's a much deeper lyrical refrain than you'll get from most pop songs, apart from maybe What Is Love. Take Me to the Land of Hell has her son Sean Lennon on production and a whole bunch of guest artists ranging from the Beastie Boys, The Roots, Wilco, Tuneyards, Lenny Kravitz, many of whom appear in this video. I know there's a lot of people who hate Yoko just cause, but personally I think this video is badass as all hell. The track we're looking at here, There's No Goodbye Between Us, doesn't have a huge amount of famous guest stars on it though, apart from maybe Michael Leonhardt. You know? You know, right? Michael Leonhardt? The guy who did the trumpet on Uptown Funk? Yeah, some Bruno Mars fan you are. Yeah, we basically just get a nice psychedelic love song. It starts with some backward strings and some echoey birds, and then this somewhat Beatlesy, yes, Beatlesy, slow psychedelic rock groove comes in.
Made up my mind to say goodbye. I went to the park.
The vocals are a bit strangely phrased on this one, like they're being fed to her by an interpreter on an earpiece, but compared to the shrieking that everyone associates Yoko Ono with, these are quite nicely understated. There's this fluffy smoothness to the production that actually contrasts quite nicely with Ono's awkwardness.
There's no goodbye. There's no goodbye. There's no goodbye.
And yeah, I like this. There's genuinely pretty flaming lips kind of quality to it. Pretty sure it doesn't go anywhere that elaborate once it gets going, but it's to the point. Deacon's remix of this song, much like the Tinariwen remix, is a little difficult to come by, or at least was. It originally appeared on a compilation album in 2020 titled Good Music to Avert the Collapse of American Democracy, Volume 2. For some reason, the first volume didn't achieve that lofty goal. This album was 77 tracks long and was available for 24 hours only on Bandcamp on September the 4th, with all profits going to Voting Rights Lab, a non-partisan organisation dedicated to electoral law.
Level 3.
Long lines for voting.
And depending how the rest of this year goes, we might well expect a third volume at the beginning of next year. So yeah, this remix was difficult to come by for a while, but as of 2024, Ono has added this remix to streaming services and downloads as an extra track on her remix album Yes I'm a Witch 2. And quite frankly, I am glad she's done this, because this might well be one of Deacon's masterworks. We have this low choir synth to start things off, and then we get a stomping kick with these psych rock guitars that are probably the first time in a while I can remember Anko sounding like they did on Strawberry Jam, or maybe even Feels.
To say goodbye, went to the park for the last time.
It's a lovely little composition that keeps the etherealness of the original, but just gives it this lovely little added punch and a few more sharp focus ingredients. It does suffer a little from one slightly baffling decision on Deacon's part though, and that's that there's this strange little empty bar before the chorus.
Between us. There's no goodbye.
This happens on both occasions, and it's a really strange bit of structure because it sort of wrong foots the chorus. I kind of feel like it'd be more effective if it just went straight into the chorus rather than having that bit, but I don't know, let's try it out.
Between us. There's no goodbye. There's no goodbye.
Yeah, you see, it's just ineffective clutter leaving loose bars lying around like that. Other than that though, the chorus works effectively, especially on the second chorus when he adds this bass synth that's a little reminiscent of 80s bands like Berlin. But the real pièce de résistance of this remix comes shortly after the second chorus.
Between us,
Why taking so long? I'm gonna lose your greatest day.
Of all the Animal Collective remixes that they could apply their own vocals to, this is an absolutely inspired move. Making this a back and forth between Yoko and Deacon, oh my word, this is so good. There's also these lovely little touches around this area as well, like the overarching organ, which just rounds this off and makes a fantastic coda to the track. There is a part of me that wants to put this in the S tier because of how good that last half of the track is, but I can't quite overlook the fact that the pacing on the first part is just stilted in a way that doesn't quite work entirely for me, even though the musical elements are really sumptuous and nice. It's a small thing, but it just kind of stops the track from being as good as it should be for me, so it is a very high A tier, top of the A tier, almost an S tier, but just can't quite bring myself to put it up there. But nonetheless, this is their best remix. So that is every remix under the Animal Collective name ranked from best to worst. It is a slightly frustrating remix oeuvre overall, as most of these remixes have got great ideas in them, some of them amazing ideas, that just don't get developed into a fully fledged piece. Deakin did say in an interview that he used remixing as a way to push himself outside of comfort zones, and the one thing I find myself thinking as I hear these is wish he pushed a lot of them further. And yet, when taken chronologically, you can see that Deacon has developed a heck of a lot in his remixes over the years, with the two most recent ones that he's done being very close to S tier for me, so hopefully he'll continue to get some remix work in the near future, because I think remix excellence is surely within his grasp at this point. In the meantime though, take this oeuvre for what it is, another dimension to Animal Collective's already sprawling discography, and overall a solid tribute to possibly the group's most underrated member. Anyway, that is my remixer retrospective of Animal Collective. Do you agree with my rankings, disagree with them, ambivalent to them? Let me know in the comments below. And if there are any artists whose remix oeuvre you think I should cover in an upcoming RBRR video, then please do let me know. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more remix-based content. Thank you for watching. There is a goodbye between us.